Do you have a slide? Sorry.
Let's move forward there. This one?
Yeah, I think so. Yes, everything is set up. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you start this one here?
Ah, yes. Okay. Then I think let's start with the video, and I will just share my screen, and I think it should be okay now.
Hello, welcome to the session today on smells and what their significance is when we think about, talk about built heritage. So basically the sense of smell is, really a vital sense in self-preservation. When it comes to detecting perhaps potential threats, like to identify rotten food or some things that are really hazardous to health, like specific solvents like acetone or so on. But of course also fire. But maybe you would also notice areas that you would consider maybe unhygienic, like maybe some public bathroom stalls. You know, you would be informed if this is a place you would want to go or not. Anyway, I have here an image of a milk carton, a German one, and already I think that was, I think, quite interesting. If you read the milk carton, what it says, and it asks and invites consumers to use their senses to detect whether food has gone off. And it says here, is my product still okay? Trust your senses, look, taste, but also smell. Does the product smell like it usually does? Right. So that's one aspect of smells that we encounter perhaps in everyday life. But if we look at how smell has been used in the past, it has also been used in a somewhat political way when it comes to segregating society, sort of along the lines of race sometimes, which has happened. And it was said that some races smell different to others, which is, of course, a very racist way of dealing with other people. But however, what is also interesting is that the first response to odors is an emotional one. and this is something that has been affirmed by scientists. And this is interesting because people sort of know it, you know, and you know that you react to smells, you like them, you dislike them. But this field of research has been rather marginalized in the past, and one of the reasons is that the sense of smell, olfaction, has often been seen as somewhat a primitive sense, and maybe even functionless. So my first training, as you know, maybe was as art conservator. And of course, then I was interested in the materiality of objects, you know, of things more generally. And however, part of the job is to use all of your senses to really grasp, to understand your object, what's wrong with it, basically. So you touch perhaps surfaces to feel the texture, maybe detect any imperfections. You assess and analyze colors to detect changes that may indicate previous interventions, or maybe forgeries, even if we talk about easel paintings or so, yeah. You would, by gently tapping surfaces, you can detect voids, so like hollow areas, there are some conservators even that taste building salts to really identify these salts. I do not advise to do that anyway. So, but the characterization of an object is also done through smell. So some odors can provide information about the nature and the character, or maybe changes of a material. And they're also an important part of an object analysis, or perhaps of damage. You know, if you go into a room, you can smell if there's a musty smell, then maybe that would be an indicator that there is some kind of mold growing. You know, that gives you already an important information. But if we look at a building and what a building can tell us at the moment it was built or reworked, it can tell us also a little bit about the role of smells. But what I wanted to also point out was sort of the importance of smell is in academia. Academia has been moving between the two poles of either neglecting or paying close attention to the sense of smell. The historian Mark Jenner had remarked that dealing with smells is usually considered infantile and primitive. So I'm quoting primitive, a point of view that rather privileges cognitive and intellectual capacities over sensory knowledge. But however, the relationship between odors and cultural heritage is now beginning to emerge more and more, and it has been argued that also odor contributes to the cultural significance of a place. Building materials, building styles, or building constructions are characteristic of a region and a time, as you know, but maybe even odors that exist in certain places, which maybe are created through specific building materials. Just think of a building made just of wood, yeah, and the smell of wood, or of an earthen building, then maybe you have a bit of the smell of the earth, or maybe even no smell, because earth is a very good, earthen buildings are very good building materials to absorb any kind of odors. But it also tells us about smells in a place, tell us about the use of a place and the surrounding. And it can tell us maybe how a place is used today. Maybe it can tell us how a place was used, what was done in a room, you know, in a hall and wherever at a certain time. But it also gives us a sense of place. Yeah, so it contributes somehow to the atmosphere of a place. However, because there has not been a lot of attention paid to smells, it is often not considered in the analysis and in the assessment of a heritage site. Jorge Otero Pailos and Adam Jasper, preservationists, they are they say that actually we as people dealing with heritage are not really equipped to consider how odor actually contributes, or which role it should play in the heritage conservation practice. And they say that one should really consider smell characteristics in the assessment of a site, as well as its documentation and interpretation. Now, I'll go a little bit back in history. And here I'd like to take now as an example Palladio. Andrea Palladio was a well-known Italian architect, and he had built many fantastic villas. If you look at the one in the bottom right, that's Villa Rotonda, for instance. I think that's very well known. Anyway, he mentioned in the book he wrote, it's called The 4 Books of Architecture, that the latrines needed to be located in such a manner within a house so that the smell would be easily sort of evacuated. So already he is already in his treatise paying attention to smell. He also said that a house in general, when you start building a house, you should be aware where you build it, that you don't build it where you've got negative, bad air. And in that case, of course, he was thinking maybe more of maybe marshlands or so, where you've got maybe airs that are not that good. But a thought that came somewhat later was also building materials, and they should be done or they should have a certain characteristic where they would be kept sort of hygienic in a way, and hygienic would also mean that they wouldn't smell. So anything like smooth surfaces. If you think of now today in a kitchen, you have whatever steel surfaces in the sink, maybe porcelain. Anyway, it's surfaces that are easily kept clean, hygienic, but also where you maybe wouldn't have sort of the source of specific smells if they are able to linger. Yeah. Okay. Now. Heritage, as we know, has many values, and there are many different value models that have been proposed over time. Just for the sake of the argument now, I would like to focus on one of the values, that is the social value, and it has already been identified by the Borough Charter as one of the values that contribute to the cultural significance of a place. So cultural significance means aesthetic, historic, scientific, social, or spiritual values for past, present, or future generations. And this cultural significance you can find is in the place itself, in the fabric, in the setting use, and the associations, meanings, records, related places, and related objects. Right. So social values intend the meaning a place has for communities, for cultural groups, for individuals, and what and the role a place has in the shaping of identity. Various methods, like I said, have been employed, and new ones are always tested to determine and assess these social values by investigating the engagement with places. This engagement can occur on a cognitive level, on a behavioral level, but also on an emotional and sensory level. So to assess heritage values, that can be done with the use of different methods. and they're mostly found in the disciplines such as history, art history, building archaeology, archaeology, of course, construction history, and so forth. But social values cannot really be assessed with these methods, because if you really want to engage with people and want to find out what groups of people, communities, individuals, what their meaning or what the significance of a place is to them, you will have to do this with ethnographic methods. So that's then when we talk also about somehow a people-centered approach. Yeah. So that this method is of interest for the meaning of odors, I will show you now soon, but I need to take you on a little detour now. So collecting, documenting, and recording, and finally the assessment of data concerning tangible aspects of built heritage relies on and is based on information that is visually both perceived, compared, and evaluated. However, the focus on the visual perception cuts off information that only can be grasped through other senses. And the focus on the visual sense and the hierarchizing of senses reaches way back to Aristotle and Plato, who devalued the sense of smell of something, which I had pointed out before, as something animalistic, compared to vision, which was cherished because it had the ability to stimulate thought. And although the visual sense holds this importance, it is the sense of smell that first develops within a human being. And the sense of smell, like I said, is essential because it informs of any kinds of danger around us. Yeah. So even if we only use one of our senses, the senses of hearing, touch, and smell are also important for grasping and understanding the essence of built environment or the environment as such. Right. Now, I had said before, smells are able to contribute to the sense of place, and this has already been indirectly or maybe even directly acknowledged for some time. So in the assessment of landscape characteristics by Natural England, the sensory data, so information coming from sound, touch, and smell, have long been understood to play an important role in the manner how environment is perceived and how qualities of a landscape are formed. Or if you look at the American Chinese humanistic geographer Hu Fan Tuan, he argued in 1979 that odors, and I'm quoting, odors lend character to objects and places, making them distinctive, easier to identify and remember. Odors are important to human beings. Meaning of smell is therefore connected to and based on the materiality of a place, to building materials, but they will also give information how a place was or is used. If you think, for instance, of cooking or smoking or rearing of animals, you know, or if you go to a Catholic church, you know, the smell of incense, even if there is no mass at that moment, you would still smell this incense in this environment. So, like I said, smells inform us about past and present uses of a smell. They have the potential to give information of particular events. And this is what the geographer Douglas Porteous had proposed as something that he called smell event. And they can be singular nature, they can happen several times. What some smell events can do is leave traces behind, even for a long period of time. And these smells, so what is a smell? Basically, you have organic compounds, and they are volatile. Yeah. So let's say you are in a lemon. You're standing underneath a lemon tree, and you can smell this lemons already standing there. And why? Because you have these individual little compounds, and they sort of fly through the air, and your nose can captures them, and then basically that is your smell. But anyway, and these deposits, so if you imagine these molecules flying through the air, so some of them they begin, then they sort of rest on an object, on a surface, and maybe they stay there, or they maybe are removed by rain if it's outside. Maybe they're cleaned off, or something is being repaired. Let's say the surface has to be sanded down or something, then obviously that smell is gonna be removed as well. However, I would like to take you now, give you a very practical example, and this is a place that perhaps already that I have worked in. It's again just to give you this information. It's a site in Ladakh in northern India, in the Western Himalayas, and on where my cursor is here. No, here, sorry, this one. That is a temple, a Buddhist temple, Tibetan Buddhist temple, and it's got century-old wall paintings. And these wall paintings were covered with soot, which accumulated over centuries on the walls due to the burning of butter lamps. This temple was built about in the 14th century. It's listed as a national monument by now, but before it was listed as a national monument, an NGO and I was part of this NGO, we had worked in this temple to do several conservation works. So this temple is, or I should go back to this image, sorry. This temple is made of, it's an earthen architecture. It has 3 stories, and it's a living monument, so it's still being used today. And these wall paintings are very exquisite, actually, and on the ground floor you have very richly painted images. You've got a very good painting technique that was employed, and that you have on the ground floor many mandalas and deities and so on and so on. Okay, but what is important also, and that was already part of the painting process, that you had donors who gave money to have these paintings painted, and by using precious materials like perhaps certain pigments, but also gold, for instance. I'll just go back again, sorry about this. You've got gold here on the garment. Just thinking where else, yes, all on the garment, but maybe here a little bit on the crown. Anyway, so I mean, this cost obviously a lot of money, but that was seen as a meritorious act. It was sort of a religious offering. But there are religious offerings that continue, living monument, they continue. And this is, for instance, placing of grains or incense sticks there, or the burning of sort of butter lamps. And traditionally, butter lamps were made from yak butter and then put in front of the deities. And yak, as is these little fellows, they're not little, obviously, these very sympathetic animals here. And So yak butter was also used as a foodstuff, obviously, and also used for medicinal purposes, and of course then for religious purposes. And it was considered to be a very good material due to its purity. However, this burning of yak butter through the centuries had caused a lot of soot to be produced. And this is what you see here. So here you have this area here, which is red, that has all been cleaned. This section has not been cleaned yet. And this is just a section, that's what some things conservators do, that they leave one section to show sort of the difference. You could maybe say this is maybe a bit of a didactical conservation practice. Okay. So here we have this situation where, so if we're here in the middle of cleaning this wall painting, you could say that this perhaps the soot, you could maybe argue it's patina, and patina has, because it's accumulation of dirt, maybe not always dirt, but it carries associations of reverence and reference to the past. So if we look again at 19th century British architect and writer John Ruskin, quoting, he said, "Indeed, the greatest glory of a building is not in its stones, nor in its gold. Its glory is in its age, which we feel in walls that have long been washed by the passing waves of humanity." So basically, it's a very reflective way of looking at patina, where you sort of you realize that time has passed, that people have come and gone, and sort of you are one element in this whole in time. And there's people have been, at least in the global West, have been concerned with this idea of patina, and historians, art conservators, artists, they've all either argued for the removal of patina or the preservation of patina. For some, patina is a sign of passing of time, and others just say, oh, it's dirt, just get rid of it, clean it, and let's get on with it and see what the artist had originally intended. So I had said before, there are different models of how one can look at heritage values. And again, I'm going back to Riegel, so the Austrian art historian who lived until the beginning of the 20th century, and his model, his value model is practical in the sense that you can use it for different cultural contexts, not just a sort of Western context. And he Riegel identified two fundamental values that he claims are part of a monument: the present-day values and commemorative values. And the first one is in turn subdivided into the use value and the relative artistic value, whilst the second one distinguishes between the historical value and the age value. Now, if we look at historical value and age value, so he says the historical value must be understood as the value a place has as a historic document. Not only does it inform about the moment when a place was created, but it bears testimony to changing values and needs of society who have left their mark at a given place. It can also, but the downfall, sort of, let's say, is that it can only be understood by the so-called experts. Now, the age value is very different. It is, you can see it sort of in a surface or in the building fabric, let's say. It's imperfect and it lacks completeness, and that is due to the passing of time and the effects of nature and the lawful decay. Age value and decay is, for Riegel, a sign of constant renewal of life, a bit of a Buddhist idea, yeah? And compared to the historical value, the age value can be experienced by everyone. Right, so you have with the age value, your access is also very emotional, yeah? And so you see historical value and age value, they're very contradictive at the end of the day. Age value, if you read Riegel's Der moderne Denkmalkultus, that's the publication, he suggests that one could read it that the sensory appreciation is only conveyed through the visual cues, but it has also been suggested that Riegel indirectly refers to also different smells that are part at these monuments in his concept of age value, as smells can be perceived directly and by everyone, regardless of cultural background, education, or so. Yeah. Age value bears another significant characteristic. Riegel claims that it addresses the emotions directly. It reveals itself to the viewer through the most superficial sensory. He means basically most likely visual, yeah, perception. But if you take his claims sort of as a starting point, we could really think maybe today he would think differently, or maybe that's what he intended also. He could include also olfactory cues. Now, if you analyze the meaning of the soot on the wall paintings through this value model, the use value is compromised as the images are no longer readable. Because the visibility is basically necessary for the religious practitioners to meditate with the help of these images. And concerning the wall paintings, their intactness and their legibility are paramount to the historical value, as they provide information on traditional painting techniques, styles, iconography, maybe even particular artists. And now the darkened surfaces are impact the historical value. So the age value is also evident in the deposition of soot through this imperfect state of the wall paintings. And the imperfection, which Riegel regards as a sign of constant renewal of life, echoes the idea of permanence in Buddhism. And and this age value furthermore transcends beyond the visual appearance of the passing of time, as the accumulation of soot carries symbolically religious meaning. It is the embodiment of accumulation of religious merit through the offerings that numerous monks and the religious practitioners have made over the past centuries. And furthermore, the soot itself has become spiritually charged due to the contact with the religious image, so that its spiritual value is enhanced, which could also be regarded to be a use value. Furthermore, the wall paintings obtained an increase of spiritual powers, which was enabled by the passing of time. So the offering of to the divinities in this temple with Yakbata lamps have not only left a visual trace, but also an olfactory one. However, for people who are familiar with the smell of yak butter, because people who live in that region, they are familiar with it, that is part of their of their food stuff. The smell in this temple may be very much so something, well, obviously normal, but it has a particular meaning, and therefore it will occupy specific semantic fields that are related to religion, religious practices, maybe even with this particular temple. And what is interesting here is that the meaning of odors are learned and culturally determined, and they are not only grounded in personal, but also in commonly shared experiences. Odor therefore plays a significant role in the shaping of identity and in collective memory. And collective memory here should be understood as a memory of an event or an everyday practice that a particular community remembers, and that is a common experience past. But it also helps to forge cohesion, social cohesion. So the passing of time manifested through the accumulated soot with its particular smell represents therefore an age value, not only as a visual, but also as an olfactory element. And the patina therefore does not only have visual qualities and values, but also olfactory qualities. And patina therefore becomes the carrier of meaning in terms of collective memory. And odor thus also has a certain use value as it shapes identity and is part of collective memory. As you see here, is not just something one needs to consider when we look at cleaning of a place. We're not looking only at values usually regarded through aesthetics or visual cues, but now looking also what role smell plays in terms of identity or collective identity or memory. And one would have to ideally look at, also the community members and their idea of the role of smell in this place. And this is more general thing, if there are conservation actions taking place, how much does one pay attention to smell, or most likely not? And I think one should really integrate an assessment of smell from different perspectives, scientific point of view and so on, but from the point of view of communities and community members. Right, and it's time for a little break. Welcome back to today's session on the significance of smells in architectural heritage. Now, if one would want to record smells, there is a method that is called headspace. And with this method, you can detect these VOCs, those are the volatile organic compounds, and you collect them and you store them on a carrier and then analyze them in laboratory with gas chromatography, mass spectrometry to identify and quantify the individual molecules. And here you have an example where you basically have, this is a flower, and I don't know which because I'm not good at that kind of thing. And you put, like in this case, like a glass sphere over it, and the molecules will be collected by this carrier and then analyzed in laboratory. But you can do something similar in different spaces where basically these molecules are collected. So you can identify what these molecules are, and you can even reproduce them if you want to do so. But if you look at reproduction of smells, there is you will have the actual composition of this certain smell, but it doesn't really say anything about the meaning of the smell that it has for people, for cultural groups, for communities. And in addition, you will have to think of the fact that because smells and the meaning of smells are learned, what people maybe 100 years ago thought about a certain smell would be maybe very different today, or the same smell, but if you look at different communities, different areas, people will judge a smell very differently. There was an even older version of measuring odors, and this is an olfactometer from 1887. It's in the National Museum of American History now, and it was invented by the Dutch scientist Hendrik Swademaker, and with this he was able to detect smells and their concentration. Right. Now, what I'd like to give you now some more examples. So some years ago, I had done a study project with students at BTU, and we were looking at the significance of smells and how, how smells sort of related to a place and what kind of memories and associations were triggered with certain smells, and how all of this came together in what is called a smellscape. And as an example, we used the Hörsaal 3 on BTU campus, and it was built in 1981. During the GDR times, and in 2015 it was closed to the public and fell into disuse, and it was listed then in 2020 as a monument. And here you see screenshots from the database of monuments in Brandenburg, and where we have this this building dated 1981. It's got a flat roof. It was built obviously as a lecture hall, and it is quite remarkable because well, for one, the acoustics inside the building are very good, and you've got large working tables and so on. You have very good, it's easy to see what's happening sort of where the lecture stands and so on. So it's very cleverly designed, the place. And what is also interesting, that it retains most of its historic furnishings, from the floor to the ceiling and the wall covers. And we have then you have here in the front, of course, a lecture area, and here in the back, because it was also used, for projection. So you have a projection area cabin. I'm not sure if it's maybe one of these here or here. I don't remember. Sorry. And you have then an interpreter's booth and so on and so on. So it's the only campus building that retains its historic and unaltered design and furnishings, but it has, of course, then also scientific, technical, and historic values. And what is particular about this place, is that it has a particular smell, and that is due to this the building materials that were used, for the tables and the chairs, which you don't see now. Maybe here in the back there are some, and the floor and so on. And they were slightly different than those used in the former West, and therefore they would of course have a different smell, you know. Now here we have the ground plan of this lecture hall, and here I said, oh, now here we have it, the projection, film projection room, the translators booth, then you have a preparation room, you have a room where you keep a storage room sort of, staircase, and yeah, and then sort of the demonstration. So here you have sort of the lecture area. Right, and this was the basis we used then for the smellscape, but let me come to this. So what happened was, no, I think I'll start with this image, sorry. So what we did to make a smellscape, so basically a map of the different smells in this area, first thing was that using the ground plan, students were asked to record the smells of each and every individual object. So that's why you've got somebody with their head in this furniture, and the smells were quite distinctive, even though it was winter, and as you see, it's still Corona time, so they were wearing a mask. But actually also this wearing of the mask helped to detect smells, because then you're sort of back in your, sort of as a neutralizer, yeah, with a mask, and then you take it off and smell again, and sort of the nose doesn't become used to all these different smells, but you always have sort of a neutralizer through this mask. So anyway, what they did is they recorded the different building materials and the building materials with the smells, and they wrote it all down. Usually this is an approach I took from building archaeology sort of, or conservation work. What we do is when we record damage to fabric, we investigate each individual area. This is what we're doing here, but not visually in that sense, but from an olfactory aspect. Then the next step would be that this information was then put in a glossary, and here you see individual building areas or fabric. Then they also described what the intensity is of the odor, like a Likert scale going from 1 to 7, and what is the radius of the smell, how far, standing from so and so many meters, centimeters away, can they still smell it? That was sort of the idea. And then all of that coming together, you would then create something like this. This is what the students had created, trying to sort of map smells in according to where they could be detected. This is just an example. Right. What they also did in this project was that they was their interpretation of smells, giving it particular colors, showing where they are in space, these smells. But the next thing was that they, of course, with an ethnographic method, is that they interviewed different stakeholders. So you had a caretaker, you had professors, you had the former students and so on. They were all asked what their associations and memories and so on were with these smells at this place. Smell maps can be done also differently, and here I have an example of sort of a smellscape mapped more in a 3D manner. It's not something I did, but it has been done by somebody else. And here you see sort of the types of smell, different colors, and the radius in which it can be found, the area in which it can be found, and the intensity. I think intensity is, you see here, with the height of these cones. Yet another example, that is something I'm working on now, is that I'm looking at a building in Berlin. It was in the former GDR, and it is the former head office of the Ministry of State Security of the GDR House 1. It was built 1960-61, and it was the office of the Minister for State Security, Erich Mielke. And what I'm looking at specifically is his private quarters. And they are all accessible. It's now it's a museum. It's the Stasi. It's called the Stasi Museum. And so what is particular about this place is that you still have the historic furnishings. Not all of the objects that used to be in the place are still there. Some have been taken away already right at the beginning after the fall of the wall. But it still has a very individual smell in this area. So what I'm doing here is, again, I'm working with a glossary of materials that you see here. So this a knotted cushion and this one you find here on this couch or bed of his. And I'm giving them particular colors and colors for the material, and colors for the smell, and then I would map them. A problem is with describing odors is that we are not used to doing that, at least not in the global West. There is really a lack of training, a lack of, well, interest maybe as well, when it comes to describing odors. So there are odor description classifications, sort of when it comes to negative smells perceived in the environment, and that is used when you want to detect bad smell in the air, you know, to get rid of it finally, you know. Or if you think of perfumery, they have like odor wheels to distinguish the different types of perfumes. You have it for wine tasting and so on and so on. And here they have come up also with an the Saint-Croix sensory odor wheel. They've come up with different terms and classifications for smells, like chemical smells or animal smells or earth smells or, you know, culinary smells and so on and so on. But again, it's something that is not being used, or there's, like I said, a lack of training. So I use different types of classifications like this and try to put it together. And one of the results would be that this is how, for instance, I would map, in this case, not the smells, but it looks it's somewhat similar, but the materials of the building or of this room. And then the map for smells would be somewhat different, would have different colors because the color association with certain smells is different to just arbitrarily chosen colors for materials. Anyway, another example, and now I'm looking at different scales of how one could work, and now I'm giving you an example for making a smellscape for large areas. We've had small ones. We had a room, you know, the lecture hall, then we had these private quarters, and here I have now another example. This is a large scale. This is a city in the southern France, Grasse. And I'm looking in particular at at the historic center of Grasse, and I've been there several times and recording odors. So Grasse is famous for in perfumery, and they had it sort of became slowly a city for perfume. It was involved in actually in glove making centuries ago, and because when you work with tanneries for making leather, you know, these different production processes, they involve a lot of chemical products, and then there was quite stinky situation emerged, and you had these gloves that were not very pleasant in their smell. So what they did there in Grasse, they used then different methods to give them a better smell through putting on through embedding them in with flowers and so on and so on. So, and that's then slowly how from a city where you had more tanneries that evolved then to a city where you had large plantations of very fragrant flowers, and they cultivated around Grasse, around the historic center, and of course further into the fields, different plants like lavender, rose, tuberose, jasmine, also not in Grasse but a little bit further away, violets. And here you see a historic postcard at the beginning of the 20th century where the women here are cultivating maybe roses. Again, I'm not so good with vegetation. But there was a whole area, so you could say it's a cultural landscape perhaps, yeah, where you have Grasse and all these other places where you had other plantations of flowers. So for instance, violets didn't grow that well in Grasse, but I think in Bar-sur-Loup and Tourette-sur-Loup, I think those were the areas where it grew better. You had, of course, then also the different factories that were specialized for the extraction of essential oils. And here you can see also development of the different types of factory, because it depended, of course, on the scientific advancements in extraction. You had where you first maybe had things like working with the alembic, where you have sort of boil water and the vapor sort of, no, you have a sort of a recipient, a container, you boil the water in it. On top you have like a sieve on that which you plant this flowers, you know, like let's say lavender, and with the vapor, the essential oils sort of get liberated and taken away with the vapor, and then it sort of it cools down, it gets separated, and then you have at the end the essential oil. But then, of course, through time you had different extraction methods using also different solvents and so on, and that is then reflected also in the architecture of these different factories and so on. However, it became obviously, you know, it's all a matter of it's obviously a business, and if you don't make enough money, you will have to locate your business elsewhere, and that meant that from the 1960s onwards, the factories that, or smaller business that were maybe inside of the city, moved outside of the city or to another country even. And it sort of declined. And then, of course, the costs for the prices for land, if you sell your land to build apartment houses, also you make more money than cultivating roses or so. And of course, this pressure on the house market changed also on the whole situation in Grasse. However, Grasse markets itself as the world city of perfumery, and I'm wondering how much you can actually see of that in the city, or maybe not see, but smell it as well. So here I have on the left an image or a map with smells detected in January, and then one in in September. And what I think is quite remarkable is, for instance, the colors that I associated with the smells were for me more the sort of an associative color coding, but you can see that the colors for me in when it's a higher temperature, when it's warmer, are so the smells are much stronger than winter. But you notice that maybe yourself that in winter one cannot smell that much, not so detailed, smells are not so intense. But you can also see these pinkish colors here. They're all sort of represent perfume, and interestingly, you have a couple of perfume houses here. So whenever you walk down the streets, the smells were quite intensive of these flowers, or perfumes, I should say. Smells, just like to go back now to what happens again with the smells and how much smells inform us of how people live and what their values are, what their habits are, and if you think now, perhaps if smell that used to be present, at least again, I'm talking now about Germany, for instance, where you had smoke. You could smoke in bars and clubs and restaurants, in public buildings. Maybe you remember the smell of the stale smoke in some buildings, and then that is interesting that this kind of smell is, for me, a little bit of a smell of the past. And I've just found here very interesting, going to Montreal, that you had these signs on buildings, and in fact that you're not allowed to smoke again a radius of 9 meters from the entrance area. Here again 9 meters, so you're not allowed to smoke anything. But yeah, so again, how much smell is part of maybe also a sign of well-being, or of health aspects. So once the volatile organic compounds enter the nose, molecules are identified, and then the information passes onward to the olfactory bulb and the olfactory cortex, from which it moves to the limbic system. And in fact, the limbic system is connected to 2 structures: the amygdala, that is responsible for emotions, and the hippocampus, that is related to memory and associative learning. And what is interesting, that the sense of smell has the ability to recall particular autobiographical events through smells that are associated with these events. What is interesting, that the triggering of memories through odors is not so much a correct recollection, but it's rather guided by the emotions that were caused at that moment. So basically then the smell is somewhat a carrier of emotional response. Right. And at the end, why is it important to look at smells at places? Because memories and emotions that are triggered then contribute to a collective and to individual identity. And to understand the meaning that smells have and what the relationship of people is with places can only, like I said, be achieved with this ethnographic method. And by that I mean qualitative interviews, participant observation, or maybe even participant smell mapping, to get sort of a multisensorial knowledge of a place. So this is also interesting if you look at the Faro Convention. The Faro Convention was drawn up in 2005 by the Council of Europe. It is the its official name is Council of Europe Framework Convention on the Value of Cultural Heritage for Society. And it postulates that everyone should be encouraged to participate in heritage activity like identification, interpretation, and so forth. And of course, the protection, conservation, presentation of cultural heritage. So this convention sort of postulates a very democratic approach in heritage making at the end of the day. You know, that it's not only the experts who will be able to say what heritage is, but that everybody is involved. And in that sense, one could, I think, very much link the idea of the ethnographic approach in identifying the meaning of smells with communities to the FAO Convention, which sort of looks at the democratic way of sort of looking at heritage. And of course, again, this relates, the FAO Convention relates also to the Declaration of Human Rights from 1948 in Article 27, where it says that everybody has the right freely to participate in the cultural life of the community, to enjoy the arts, and to share in scientific advancements and its benefits. But I think, of course, the FAO Convention goes a bit further. So, summing up, historic places bear traces of past human activities, and some of these traces possess also olfactory qualities. And odors at places, therefore, not only allow conclusions about current use and former use, but also of building materials, and they contribute at the end to the sense of a place. Right, and there are different ways again, or I should think that if we look at conservation, and I'm not meaning now the hands-on conservation, but more generally all the activities that are part in understanding and protecting, preserving, or working with, you know, allowing change, of course, also. But if we look at a place, at heritage sites, that it would be helpful and important, I think, to include other sensory aspects of a place and moving beyond visual qualities only. It's like, for me, a little bit too one-sided if we look only at a place through the fabric, but we'll have to look at the people, we'll have to look at values and everything coming together. And I think here, if we look at smells and what people say about a place, according to smell, like the age value, nobody has to be an expert, you know, but they, with their, you know, one person's associations and memories are just important as somebody else's, triggered through smell and the meaning of smell, and therefore the value of a place can be conveyed or can be analyzed, maybe not, could be analyzed through different smells. Right, and this is, of course, a way how to look at a people-centered approach in conservation, and a way how to integrate polyvocality, so the different voices, different opinions, different perspectives, when we assess values of heritage and when we sort of come to interpreting and presenting a place. Right, and that's the end of the session. And I'll be looking forward to hearing your feedback. Bye-bye.
Okay, so that was the end of this presentation. And I think today's topic is much more familiar than the last times, especially the taboos and procedures. The odors is everywhere, anywhere, right? And I think, to my personal opinion, since COVID-19, we are wearing masks and we have always some distance in between the other person every day, right? So that the smell function seems to be somehow, not anymore there. But then after COVID-19 and nowadays, we can see each other in person, and we have each one very individual smells, I think, and that is something to do. Yeah, so perhaps the heritage sites that you are going to research on as a part of your master thesis, it should have also some smells, right? And do you have anything in your mind now? What kind of the smells it has?
For example, in the occupied houses, maybe there are some stink. The bad smell because the houses aren't used for many years.
Yeah, right. It has like a smell of dust.
Yeah.
Or any other like old papers of the wall, perhaps, or something like that, right? Okay. Is there anything else?
And maybe in my study, the most important is the smell of the coffee, and also the smell of the dessert, and also some old furniture smell also happened in when I do some field study.
Right, right. Do you like the smell of the old furniture?
Some of the sofa, it has the old, like, I don't know how to describe the smell, but it is different with the new one.
Yeah, I am aware, and I'm not like. But yeah, if you could measure with some parameter or something, then would you like to deploy this methodology as well?
I don't
You don't know.
I don't know at this moment that maybe I can do more research.
Okay. Right. I think the smell of the coffee is very strong. I know somebody he's actually working in Starbucks, and he has mentioned about how strong smell it has, and when he can come back home, but still it smells somewhere, and the smell of Starbucks and coffee, it has a very strong smell. Right. Okay. Do you have any other examples of smell?
An interesting thing could be like, even in the coffee shops, like the smell of the cigarette, like they used to smoke there, but nowadays it's not really allowed.
Yeah.
So this kind of, the time factor is also can be smelled in a sense.
Right.
Because we can smell like these small amounts of cigarette in the furniture maybe or something. So it might give another layer of the historicity of the place.
Yeah, that's right. So any ideas from the online students?
So if it doesn't have to be sort of heritage related, it's not heritage related, but depending on the sort of fragrance you wear, sometimes I think it seems to remind sort of people of specific people who used to wear fragrances, the same fragrance. So my colleague said once that when I was wearing a fragrance that is not same as his ex-girlfriend. So I understand that the fragrances are sort of associated with memories from that, and perhaps emotion as well. So that was one that I could think of.
Right. So it could it could create some personal, emotional attachment towards, some old dolls. Yeah. Anything else?
maybe some old buildings with some vegetarian or moss on the wall. They have special smells of the planet.
Right.
Also gives this sense of age and the passing time of the building.
Yeah. Do you have some examples in Japan or?
I think mostly in Europe, some masonry building or building made by stone. So we see growth with the plant. But I'm not sure in Japan. That's those situations.
Okay. So today's topic is like, shall we consider that is intangible of the tangible? Perhaps. Okay, she is not present here.
I'm just curious, like how can we use this smell as an additional research? Like, honestly, like for example, in the coffee shops, because it's a very good example, I feel like. Like, what is the additional merit of using this smell of coffee, or how could that be beneficial for a research paper? That's what I'm thinking about.
I think she has also mentioned that the academic scholars has not yet so much attention towards the smell or smellscape in general, especially in European countries. So that is one of the merits that to research on that. But I don't know. There is a registration, so it's a kind of the cultural heritage list inside of Japan. That is kaori no hyakke, the smell of 100, what smellscape of the 100 places inside of Japan. That was initiated by the Ministry of Environment, and that has been listed, as I said, 100 sites. For instance, in Kanda, there is a bookshops, this is a street bookshop streets, and those bookshops is basically dealing with the old second-hand book. And second-hand book is also has a special smells, right? So that is one of the example. But that was listed initially, but nobody actually there is aware that is listed as a cultural heritage. So I don't know what the merit will be there. But I think Alex is going to research about that topic of the kaori no hyakke, the smellscape 100 in Japan, very soon, starting in April, I guess. So she is back now. Hi. Good morning, Alex.
We can
I think, yeah, you are muted.
Yes, I was muted. Sorry. Hello, everyone. How are you doing?
Yeah, we are all good. Okay, so we had a talk about the smellscape and what kind of the cultural heritage or the cultural sites they are aware, especially in terms of the smellscape. What's the smell? What kind of the smells did they already had experience in their own experience? And let's start with the basic information. I mean, the keywords or some of the topics that you are not quite understood. If there are anything you'd like to ask, then let her know first.
Yeah, I have some questions about the smells and maybe a little bit refer to the lecture in Tuesday. And I was wondering that because in the last part of the lectures and Professor, you mentioned about different parts of in the street, there are different parts of smells. And I was thinking that should be the smell, including in the criteria of the cultural landscapes, especially of the city landscape, because the city landscape also located, also linked with the smell. I would like to know what's your idea.
Yeah. Well, I think, yeah, this is all, yeah. I think, okay, so let me start from, where shall I start? So I think, yes, one should really, if we want to try to understand the significance of heritage, we rely on information that we can obtain visually. So we can measure things, you know, we can tell what color something is, what size, what kind of material it's made of, and so on and so on. So these are all sort of maybe also very objective and rational type of data, you know, that's quite easy. And you know, in the past, okay, now again I'm talking only from the Western perspective, okay, but in the past there is, I mean, if you look throughout the centuries, there has always been the focus on the visual sense. You know, there's a hierarchy, you know, also from the Greeks and the Romans and so on. They've got a hierarchy of senses, and vision was the best because it was most rational. Yeah, you could reason upon this. The lowest sense was the smell, because it said it's sort of like the animals, and that's the one side. And the other side is, or so maybe, well, yeah, another type of argument was that because we can, whenever we smell something, I mean, a strong smell, and when we're consciously, there is a sudden reaction to something, to a smell, and an emotional reaction. And that means if there are right away the emotions that are triggered, it's difficult to reason, you know. And that was sort of the explanation that was given in the past to why vision, and then sound, and then and then at the end taste, why you have this hierarchy. And this is sort of still present in nowadays, maybe more Western, how we look at heritage. So sort of it's the visual aspects, and it's sort of the cognitive aspects connected to it. Emotions, I mean, so when we talk about heritage in general, basically we have, of course, an emotional reaction to heritage. If you think of something from your grandparents, whom you love, let's hope, you know, and you get something from them, you have maybe an emotional connection to it, you know, the house where you grew up in, you know. But the thing is, emotions are, you cannot reason with emotions, and it's something very personal. And that's why we have also sort of these heritage laws and all these assessment things and so on, because we try to be rational about it. Yeah. Okay. So that's sort of a background explanation, but still, because it's actually, what is heritage? It's about people and their connection to heritage. I think by including smells and the meaning that smells have for different people, you know, and how then through smells they relate to places, and then can identify with places, and they have memory of places, and could maybe individual memory, maybe collective memory. I think one has to be much more aware of when we look at heritage and we try to conserve it or whatever, or assess it and try to understand the meaning, we will have to look at what the nose can tell us about this heritage as well. You know, so I think it's connected. And I think it's great that in academia now there is much more interest in smell, and you know, but still, I'm thinking that it was like I hope I said this in the lecture, but there was one place in just in Ladakh, of course, where you had a really strong smell in this temple. And the first time I went there, and that was that the first time I went to Ladakh? I think so. So this was the first time for me in an Asian country. First time for me where I was really confronted with Tibetan Buddhism and so on and so on. So all new things for me. And the smell in the temple was for me an extremely strong but very unpleasant smell. I couldn't stand it. Yeah, it made me feel a little bit sick. Yeah, so it's like, oh, okay. And but that's me, because I'm an outsider. I would assume, yeah, that is sort of, that has been said through research also, that people who are unfamiliar with smells and they don't know where it comes from, they will have this feeling of nausea. Yeah, but because it has to do maybe with uncertainty, you don't know if it's dangerous or not, those kinds of things. But what about people who live in that place, who know that smell because it's normal for them? Yeah, and it has to do with the yaks and with this yak butter, which is a very prestigious material in Tibetan and in the culture and so on. So for them, maybe it's a very positively connected aspect. So doing now conservation work and taking away the dirt, the patina, the soot, you're also taking away the smell. But what does that do to people and how they identify it? And now, I mean, this was something that we did, of course, with always in relation with clergy and so on. Of course, we didn't decide things by ourselves. But the point is, if I would do this work now, I would do it differently. I would use an ethnographic approach. And first, I would want to find out what people think, for instance, about the smell, and if it's important or not. I would try to document the smell. I would use this headspace technology or something, and really be able to analyze the molecules. Not me, I can't do that, but then get the data, get the samples, and then have experts do the analysis of that. That I would have a much better understanding of what I'm actually dealing with, and then be able to do the research, because maybe that is going to be one of the smells that are going to be. It's going to be one of the lost smells, because people don't use nowadays anymore the yak butter for burning in the temples, but they use, I know, sunflower oil or something, I don't know, but something that you buy in a bottle, and I don't think it has a particular smell. That's one thing. The other thing is, because of the danger of fire, if you have an open flame in the temple, then they had said, well, let's put the candle outside. And now the puja, or part of the puja, is outside of the temple. Another aspect where I'm thinking, is that such a great idea? This is living heritage. Maybe we have to put, I'm changing the ritual. Is that really so good? Is there not another way of doing things? But okay. So first of all, I've got no longer the yak butter, plus for preventive conservation reasons, I'm having the ritual outside, so this smell would no longer be inside temples anymore. So maybe this is going to be a lost smell. Even more important to do, I think, documentation work. And of course, asking people, what is your relationship to these smells? What do you identify with this smell? And maybe it's going to be only the older generation of Ladakhis. Maybe the young people, the 20-year-old people who then live in Leh, who've got different lifestyle, who travel and live maybe in Delhi or somewhere else in India or somewhere else in the world. Maybe this smell has nothing to do with them anymore, but it's still part of our history. So really long answer for your question. That was a really long answer. Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and I clarified lots of ideas in the lectures. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay, anything else? Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Who's speaking?
Or from the classroom? Maybe you won't be able to see me from the.
It's difficult. The camera doesn't pick it up. Wait, I have to change my. Wait.
It'll move over. I guess supposedly if I continue to speak, the camera will move over to me.
Yeah.
But
It sounds good. Okay.
one thing I wanted to ask the example brought up just now in your answer and also in the lecture was the living heritage of the temple in Ladakh. But for a place that's, let's say, no longer living heritage, which is maybe, let's say, in a museum space, what do you think about the preservation of smellscapes there, in the sense of how realistic should it be preserved, even if they're unpleasant or not? I say that with in mind, I was reading about a museum near Lake Biwa in Japan. And within the museum, they have a house, which they wanted through the house to present the way that they've traditionally in that area lived their lives and used water from the lake. And they lived their day-to-day. For example, one of their big focuses was their toilet system, to put it most directly, and how nothing went to waste, how they would store people's fluids in certain parts of the house and then let it go through others, and then that would lead, let's say, to the rice paddies, and then using one fluid, they would do one thing, using another, they would do another, and so on. And within the museum, it was a debate whether, well, if we were to show the realism of this life and how innovative the system was, should we put in this very unpleasant smell, but realistic that everyone lived with back in the uses of the house? Eventually, they decided that visitors would complain, so they didn't put it in. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that? And this sort of smell, which isn't really, I'd say, culturally pleasant or not, it's just, let's say, unpleasant of a smell, in that sort of creating of a space, realistic space.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Super, thank you so much for your question. I appreciate that, because it brings up a couple of topics which are, of course, related to us as people who deal with heritage, who should communicate heritage, mediate heritage. So if one of you or somebody of you will maybe later work in a museum, and this is really important, it's this whole newer thing of the Sensorial Museum, or how can we make museums important for people with neurodiversive, a proper term is neurodiversive people. That's how it should be said. I just learned. Okay, so, people who maybe have, whose senses work different than the norm, and I'm quoting norm. So, yeah, I think probably in that particular case, or let me put it like this, in general, there is a discussion when it comes to museum communication, if it's a good idea or not to recreate smells for the communication of heritage. And some people say, well, it absolutely is a way to make the past sort of maybe sort of better understandable, or it's a way, it's a gateway, it's a tool to open up discussion. Other people say because it doesn't make sense, because the meaning that smells have for us today are going to be most likely different to those that people had in the past. because our experience with certain smells are going to be different to those of people, even from another culture, maybe even to your sister, brother, mother, father, you know. What you think is nice, as a nice smell, somebody else will say, ugh, disgusting. Yeah, because it has to do with your, and that's what is called autobiographical events. Sort of, if you smell a very strong smell for the first time in your life, and there is a certain context, of course, there's a certain situation, and the whole situation was maybe very pleasant, then you will associate that particular smell with something very pleasant. Yeah, and usually the first impression is the one that is really important. So, but anyway, so therefore it's debatable if it's a good idea or not to use smells for communication. I think it's good, but one has to always reframe it, and one has to really inform what is sort of the purpose and so on. So in your particular case, which I think is very interesting, I assume one could have done something, sort of something in between. So instead of maybe piping this particular smell into the exhibition space, one could have used like little bottles or little sniffy things or something, where people who would be interested what it smells like could smell it, and then put it to the side. And then it's the decision of every visitor if they want to, you know, smell the smell or not. So that could be maybe a way how to deal with it. And I'm thinking whether discussions may be different in other cultures, because my impression is that in Japan there is a great toilet, a great way of dealing with public toilets. What I hear, I will see, I hope soon, but you know, it's very clean and everything, and I'm thinking, oh great, really looking forward to clean public toilets, not like in Germany, you know, but where it's a different approach to this whole aspect. So maybe the discussions would be different in different cultures. I'm wondering, I don't know. But that also brings me to another aspect where you said it's usually that we say that we don't like this smell. And I would say yes, but maybe also no. And I had some time ago, when was it? 2 years ago, maybe. I was in Berlin in the Humboldt Forum, this new rebuilt Stadtschloss thing. It's now a museum, and they have one exhibition, and it's called, I think, Global Berlin. And they tried to, well, it's basically more, I think, for tourists, this exhibition, not for people who live in Berlin. Anyway, there is so they want to tell sort of this history of Berlin, the wall and this, that, and the other. And there is one part of the exhibition that was sort of designed by a smell artist. She is, I think, Norwegian, and her name is Sissel Tolas. So if you look her up, you will find her work. She, very interesting thing she does. But anyway, so her name is Sissel Tolas, Sissel, new word, TOLAAS, I think. And she had designed six typical smells of Berlin. And one of them was lavender, which I thought, I don't see lavender growing in Berlin, but okay. And so on and so on. And they had 6 little bottles, you know, aluminium bottles, and you could smell them. Okay. Then if you turned it around, at the bottom, there was the description of what it was supposed to be. So whatever, you had lavender and this and that. And then I smelled these things and I said, yeah, I can identify lavender here. Okay. Then I smelled something else and I said, I know this smell, but I'm not really sure now. What is this? I'm familiar with it, but it was not positive or negative. I mean, I wouldn't have used it as a perfume, but I wasn't quite sure. Then I turned the bottle around and it said dog feces. And I thought, now that's interesting. Not that she chose it. Yes, I mean, we have a lot of dogs and people don't pick up after their dogs, unfortunately. But the fact that if you take a smell out of context, it doesn't mean automatically that it will be positive or negative. Yeah. So context has a lot to do with how we judge smells. Yeah. So I think that's something to keep in mind. Another thing, and this may come to a little bit of a shock to you, but there are certain essential oils. I mean, and essential oils is of course taken from flowers and so on. But for instance, there is jasmine, and I've taken a little perfume course, and read up on this. So there are certain perfumes, like for instance jasmine or maybe lily, that have a particular smell in them, which is somewhat the smell of decay, but that some smells contain like what they've used in perfumery before, like civet or so, that comes from an animal. And these smells are sort of related to feces, because there is a specific smell in them, scatole, indole, and you have that actually in perfumery. So I mean, there's a thin line between, you know, saying something stinks, or if you just use a little bit, it was used partially in high class perfumery, and you say this smells absolutely wonderful. Yeah. There is one natural ingredient, hyraceum, which is the feces of, and I'd forgotten which animal, and they use, so this kind of one animal uses sort of one spot where they, you know, that they use as their toilet sort of, and this accumulation gets really hard after years and years and years, and then people collect it and, you know, make a sort of use that at the end, if they dilute it with alcohol and so on, and use that at the end in perfumery, and it's really expensive. Or amber, the traditional smell of amber, so ambergris, was actually the vomit of a specific type of whale. So the whale, when he digested something, and then sort of from the food he didn't feel well, and just sort of vomited, and then through the motion and staying in the sea, blah 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 blah. At one point, it gets transported to the beaches, and again, people pay a lot of money for this. And if you use a little bit, wonderful smell. But we would normally say, oh, this is absolutely disgusting. Yeah. So, you know, it's very difficult sometimes saying what is absolutely horrible or not, or durian fruit. I don't, from when I've just visited Thailand, you know, in hotels, you're not allowed, there are signs, you're not allowed to eat durian fruit, because some people say it's absolutely stinky. And I must say, I just tried durian fruit candy, and I thought I love it. It's an absolutely fantastic taste, but it smells of onions and garlic. So who would put candy with onion and garlic? But I think it's wonderful. You know, so again, you know, it's really a matter of so much of personal preferences of how you were brought up culturally and so on and so on, if you think it's a good idea or not to have specific smells. So I'm wondering if you would have the same situation like you just mentioned with this museum, if it was in a different place. Actually, wait, I can tell you, there is a museum in Great Britain. It is hold on, Yorick Museum or something. Jorvik. And it is sort of like is it like a Viking area or something, supposedly? And they have recreated one type of smell, and that is the smell of toilets. So they did it. They recreated the smell of toilets. So it's really, it's a matter of who's going to be in the commission, if the context, and so on, so many different aspects. I'd like to go to that museum in Japan that you just mentioned. Sounds interesting to see that. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I can say a little bit more about that museum you mentioned in York, and that's the York Museum. Yes, in York, and I remember, I have very strong memories of going there as a child. It was a very, very popular museum to take children to. And yeah, as soon as you say the York Museum, I can immediately think of the smell. I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me? Yeah, so to me, yeah, it was interesting when you were talking about the arguments for and against using it, but I know personally, like, and all, I think a lot of people of similar age that I know who visited this museum as a child, it really was very powerful that you remember that smell and you remember that it means, because in that time, obviously people didn't have toilets and, you know, kids like or stuff like that. It's very powerful, and so I think, yeah, that's maybe one thing to bear in mind with museums being multi-sensory, but it can really be very memorable.
Mm-hmm. And do you, so I mean, this is amazing that you, after all these years, when you were taken there as a child, that you remember it. So it must have had a fantastic impact on you, that you remember it. Yeah, and that's what the point is also, that it is said that if you have these sensorial engagements, yeah, that you can touch something, you can listen to specific sounds, you know, there's certain smells or tastes, that is really a help for you to remember. So it worked, it seems.
I have also very similar experiences when I have firstly visited to the Auschwitz Holocaust Museum, and there is a numeral exhibition room inside of this area. But one specific exhibition room is collecting some, you know, the hair that has extracted from the baby kids to the adults as well. Also, the very, you know, old furnished chair or old furnished anything like a bags and so on. And those floors, and when I entered to that room, I was literally very, very much shocked. And even though that I know the history quite well, I'm reading the book and everything, but you know, this personal and very emotional attachment comes to instinctively from the smell that I have smelled. And that was actually 10 years ago or something, but still I feel that it is, you know, a very shocking one. And I think that is also a very, you know, the Auschwitz is also one of the World Heritage. So I think that is a very good examples from the exhibitions. That has, I think, the authenticity of the smell. I don't think that it was, you know, recreated by the museum or anything.
Oh. No, I'm also thinking now that you mentioned Auschwitz. There are studies that when people have experienced something very, very traumatic, Auschwitz, that the smells connected, or for them that are connected with this experience, will later in life, they will be able to trigger these bad memories, and people will have any kinds of, you know, some kinds of disorders, and so whenever they smell these things, they get dizzy, they have nausea, they have fear, of course, all these different things. And you know, that's maybe another thing that one should be aware of if you do recreation of specific smells, you know, of heritage sites, maybe of traumatic sites or something, but in general, how much these smells maybe have a very negative effect on these people if they go there. Or you could say, but of course not, that's not the job of a museum educator, but somebody who deals with psychology. But this could be interesting, maybe also, you know, working together with psychologists, you know, how much can smells help in therapy? You know, after traumatic aspects. But I think it's something to be really aware of. I think when you design museum exhibitions and so on, that maybe some things, you know, we always say if you go on Instagram or so, or wherever it says, oh, be careful, there are some scenes that may cause you know, discomfort, that can be traumatic. It's a theme of violence and so on. Here we're talking about vision. Yeah, but maybe some smells can cause also very traumatic, sort of can trigger negative emotions. So, you know, just something to be aware of. Yeah.
Okay, so we have still around 25 minutes. What shall we do right now?
Well,
yeah, it's Thomas-san, isn't it?
I just wanted to ask about the previous lecture, but the
Ladak one.
if it's possible.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe we could do some group working about the topics that has been formally discussed with some of the people. I don't know which one is better. Shall we do maybe the group working based on two topics that is one to the other is quite relating, right? So, Alex, I have a question. Do you have any specific topic in your mind? And that could be also relating to the research that you are going to do in Japan, the research. But is there anything that could be discussed with the students?
Yes. Well, okay, so what I would like to do when I come, I'm so excited. I can't believe it's going to be happening soon. So the research I would like to do is, again, okay, maybe I'll have to explain this. I'm a person, I like doing research and then sort of teaching, but always on very practical examples, because theory is all good, but I'd like them to apply a theory, you know. So what I think is fascinating is that the Japanese Ministry for Environment has listed more than 20 years ago 100 different sites in Japan that are especially fragrant, and each prefecture could nominate these smells. So I still have to go through the list, but my understanding would be that all over Japan there are different sites which are very fragrant. And how I would understand the word fragrant doesn't mean that what I think smells good is going to be there, but that has a particular smell, which would I assume has a particular meaning for maybe the city, for a community or so. And my interest would be to first really smell if the smell is actually there, if I can smell it, because that would mean it's either a smell that you can only smell at certain times of the year, certain times of the day, or whatever, you know. That is one thing. And the second thing is, because what I find fascinating is that in more of a Western context, again, maybe you have, when it comes to urban planning and so on, and the laws, the building laws, where you can have specific activities can only take place outside of the city. For instance, industry. You know, you can't have an industrial plant right in the middle smack of the city where you're going to have all this stinky air and pollution, you know, put into the air. So, or traditionally, we spoke about that. Did we speak about that the other day? Oh, that you have specific jobs, like also before in the Middle Ages or so, there had to be sort of more outside of the city, yeah, like jobs like where you kill animals, you know, and that has then always a certain smell, you know, that you put that somewhere at the margins, or where you have specific places depending on where normally the wind comes from. So if the wind comes normally from the west, then the more stinky activities would take place in the east of a city, because there's always going to be this movement, you know. So what I'm trying to say is that the laws and so on would in the West would be, how can we reduce the smells by implementing certain laws that you have to build your building this and the industry is there and there. And by nominating smells in Japan that are very fragrant, I'd say it's an opposite way of looking at things, because I'm trying to enhance the good ones. I'm going to make people aware of the good smells or fragrant smells, and I'm not trying to suppress the negative ones. And that, I think, is a very different way of looking at, yeah. So glass half full, half empty sort of little bit approach. And then the next step would be, so the first step would be to really identify these smells that you could smell in the city where a fragrant smell was nominated, sort of. And the second step would be, again, looking at ethnographic approaches of what does this mean for people? How do they identify with smells? You know, is that particular smell, is that representative of their city? Or do they think, you know, maybe another smell is more representative? Or what do they connect also with this smell? What are their associations? Yeah, that's what I'm interested in, which I think is very interesting. So so the question is then I'm a little bit lost myself. So what, Mariko, would your question be then, how students could connect to this idea of smell for their research now? Yeah. Well, I had a talk the other day with Ayaka, and we have thought together of something I would love to do it together with you, because it sounds absolutely, sounds really interesting. Would you like to add something?
Yes, so I have a couple of things. So since Professor mentioned about my sort of tentative report title, I want to do something about sort of prostitution in Japan in the old times. So basically in the Yukak, Yoshiwara sort of type, sort of old prostitution, and the association with that and smell, and potentially, I think Professor kindly mentioned that there's kodo, so it's the kaori no michi, as in, so basically a learning or learning about sort of scent. Just like judo or kyudo, or you know, the Japanese way of scent, was also a part of an education, or especially for educated prostitutes in those Japanese sort of sex working profession at that time. So I'll be keen to sort of find resources related to how those areas could have actually smelled nice, as opposed to how it may usually be sort of perceived, which is a smelly place. So I want to be able to find sources to that is one, but on the second item I wanted to sort of talk about was I think what Professor just said was what also Ikeda Sensei said about kaori hyake at the beginning of the class, the list of all the sort of fragrant or scented sort of places listed by the Ministry of Environment. And I think that's also, the list also includes that as well, but at the top of my list, or at least personally, but should be on the top of the list, is in Japan will be the eel. So the burning or cooking of eel in Japan, and it's usually sort of if you go to a restaurant, eel restaurant, you don't need to eat that. Some people don't like it, but anyways, when you grill eels, you actually let the smoke out of the house. So it's eel, EEL. So it's by letting the smoke out of the house, people walking on the street, passing by, actually smell it, and get reminded of the smell of the eel, because Japanese people, a lot of people love eating eel. So they get reminded. It triggers hunger, and as a result, you'll find a queue in front of that eel restaurant. I think that's similar. Similar sort of, I guess, practice is applied for Japanese skewer restaurants. The chicken skewer restaurants, they actually also let the smoke out of the house on purpose, usually through front door, basically, to ensure that people smell it, which don't really happen in often in westernized nations, because you don't really want to mix food smell with everything else. But it's a practice that's still well used in Japan, and I don't think a lot of people complain unless you're a neighbor, maybe. And I think that's probably if you go search for sort of smells in Japan, that's, I personally believe, should be on the top of the list, because that's very sort of Japanese, I think, cultural as well. So I just wanted to mention that was the second point. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting. I'm sorry, I have to hold on a second. I've got somebody at the door. Hallo? Achso. Hallo.
Moin, erstmal die Post.
Ach, super, danke. Wie haben Sie es denn geschafft?
Nee, ich habe erstmal, ich brauche mal einen Schlüssel, bitte.
Ja, Moment. Das ist ja toll, dass Sie gekommen sind.
Ich habe dann noch nicht gemacht.
Naja, aber was haben Sie gemacht? Ist ja Trennkörper.
Weiß ich nicht, brauche ich einen Schlüssel?
Ich lasse jetzt gerade hier auf. Ich bin in einem Zoom-Gespräch. Ich lasse gerade hier auf. Super, danke. Ja. I'm so sorry. The man helped me. Somebody put something in my letterbox, in the key in the lock, and I can't open it, and they're fixing it now. So sorry about this. I think that's an excellent example you gave, Ayaka, with the smells, because it is completely different to West, and that's what I mean with suppressing odors. There is in Germany, people would complain of having the smell of food coming into their house or whatever. When you open the window, you don't want to smell the doner kebab or something. That different ways. So it's a nice way of micro marketing. Having the smoke into the thing. Or if you think even in westernized countries in the States, they had even laws sort of in some cities forbidding people to use deodorants or shampoo or hairspray. Not forbidding them, but the smell of it. Because they said people, it's too much of all of these smells. And I thought that's very interesting. You know, people, even if it's sort of seen as a positive smell, you know, still some people then would feel offended by it in the States. So they were said, if you go to the office, you know, don't use strong smelling deodorants or, you know, strong smelling hairspray or perfumes or whatever. So I thought that was.
So, so what should we discuss?
Hello. I have a question about the Ladakha.
Another.
Yes.
Yeah.
Please. Thank you so much for the video about like telling each process of attending this project within the NGO and with the local communities, and I'm really curious about, like, as a foreign organization, like how to communicate or to gain the trust from the local communities and also the residents right there, to actually open or to begin the entire conservation process and also the related activities in regions like that, because I know like cities or sites that are kind of isolated from the city center or the urban area. Sometimes people living right there may be a little bit like how can I put it in the correct way? Like, they are not that easy to trust the outsiders. So I'm just curious about like how your colleagues and the entire organization collaborate with the local community in the first place.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's on the one hand a matter of trust, and then on the other hand a matter also of jealousy. So a lot of things coming in, and it's very difficult, and I always feel like it's like you're walking on raw eggs. You have to be so careful in what you do, and even if you try to be super correct and everything and try to do things properly, there's always going to be something that you don't do right. And so how was the approach? Well, the thing is, how do we communicate? How did this all go about? But it was because of, first of all, the interest of the religious community in getting this conservation work done. So, and the religious community in these remote areas there, they have it's very important, religion and what the religious community says, you know, so that is already one aspect. And I'm sure, but I was not there the whole time, but I would, my assumption would be that the connection was already established through the religious community, the communication with the town elders and so on. The next step was that we collaborated with the respective monks and you know who worked there, and we had with us also people who spoke either Hindi or Ladakhi, so there was already another level of communication, you know, a common language. That was already a big help. And then we had in one of the places where we worked out a young man who was from that village, and his family was responsible for the upkeep of a little temple of a Gompa. And he spoke English and of course Ladakhi, so you know, and he knew everybody in the village. And so he was sort of our gatekeeper, sort of he was the key to open up also all the other communication. But, and here comes now the jealousy part. Of course, people then said, oh, but he's working together with the outsiders and so on, and he's maybe getting more money, and he's getting this and that, or there's going to be some families who are going to profit from foreigners coming. So there was, of course, jealousy that there was disparity, perhaps, of people being able to profit from us being there and other people not, which I think it's really difficult how to address that properly, But our attempt was to give also people a job in the communities, so people who helped us with the work, that they would profit from the situation. And of course, with communication and trust, that the point was that we went to the schools and communicated there that we had this 3-year pilot program that was supported in part by Betty from Los Angeles, that we tried to sort of really empower people, so that the point is that we were there initially helping with the conservation work, but that at the end, what we tried to do is give people the power to take care of their own heritage. Yeah, so that was basically the whole point why we did this, what we thought it was important to get this pilot program, this 3-year program going. So that our role was at one point superfluous. That was the whole point, that we would we're there, the initial, we give the impetus and then we leave, because there's no point. That's not the point of heritage at the end. If I'm trying to be a good heritage expert, doesn't mean that I have to say how things go. I should leave.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Yeah.
Okay. Now 4 minutes left. We can't do any discussions anymore, perhaps.
I have a question. Earlier in the lecture, Professor just mentioned that in smell mapping, you have compared between the place, Greece, between January and September 2023. And I'm curious about how to analyze the differences between the two different times, how to analyze the smell differences.
How you analyze them or how you assess them?
Yeah, how you assess and analyze the differences between.
Okay, the analysis was easy because I just basically walked down the streets by myself and smelled. And the things that I could smell were also in relation to temperature, because if it's a low temperature, you smell less, as you realize yourself, or if you go to a hot and humid place, then you also smell less. Yeah, so you need a certain kind of relative humidity and temperature to really be able to smell things. And then I just noted down this thing. So the analysis was the easy part. The assessing now is difficult, I'd say. And that's where I'll still have to do the work. But from what I can see is, so basically when I assess something, I'm going to say, why is it the way it is? And what does it mean? So for me, what I could see was in January, when I was there were hardly any people in the city. And the several shops were still closed, and there were not many tourists. But one has to wait until the summer months, because Grasse is in a place where it's in the Provence, and it's a place where you go sort of in the summer. the beach is not that far. You know, people go to the Côte d'Azur, blah, blah, blah. So that means then, you know, there will be more activities going on, and, you know, more shops are going to be open, maybe more, there's going to be a fair, there's going to be all kinds of things happening. So the smell in June, July, August will be much stronger. And I remember going there, but before I started with the work, but I remember being there in end of June, I think, July, and the smell of perfume was overwhelming. It was so overwhelming, I had to leave because I felt sick again. So much so to micro marketing. It wasn't micro to me, it was macro marketing, but yeah. So, and then I mean, this is, I think, interesting to what Ayaka said before, you know, if you have the smell of food in the streets, people in Japan won't complain. They say, oh great, it smells like eel, let's go for dinner or something, yeah. There it's going to be used obviously also as marketing things. There is a big company, perfume company, Fragonard, their name is, there are 3 big companies in Grasse: Gallimard, Fragonard, and Molinard. Fragonard has 4 or 5 shops in a certain area within the historic center of Grasse. And when they've got their door open or even their ventilator going, you can always smell the perfumes. You walk down the street and you smell their perfume. It's olfactorily dominating. Yeah, so they are the dominators of smell in one certain area. It's amazing. It's really amazing. Even in a little side alley where you would say, and this is where vision and smell, where they come together. Even a little side alley where you would say, this is where dogs go to their toilet. It's a bit stinky area. It doesn't stink at all. It smells like flowers because the ventilator of Fragonard throws out the air into this little alley. And this is what we say, oh, this can't be possible that it smells good in this alley. Not possible, but yes, it is. Same marketing thing that they use in Grasse. There are several parking houses in Grasse, but there is one particular one right smack in the middle. When you get out of the parking house, sort of going up the stairs, which usually are smelly, not there. It smells of perfume. They must be pumping in perfume into this parking house. Also, the airport in Cannes. You get out of the airport area, you pass security, smell of perfume. And it's not because there's a duty-free store. I'm sure they're pumping up a perfume again into the system. All marketing. Yeah.
Okay, so now the time is limited, and I'd like you all to have this assignment about the topic relating to today's one. What kind of the smellscape or smell could be understood as a heritage, perhaps? And also based on your personal experiences, what kind of the heritage side and what kind of the smell was the most impacted? I'm going to ask you today, tomorrow's lecture, after watching the video. Okay. So, do you have some individual sessions after this class today as well?
Yes.
Is there any student who would like to have the individual sessions with Professor? You?
And also me, sorry.
You,
yes.
Okay. And the other students? Because we have only 1 day left for tomorrow. And I think, or I could suggest that everybody could have the individual consultations. It will not last longer than 15 minutes, roughly.
There are some So I apologize, but is there going to be somebody who's going to be ready for some questions for their paper?
Yes.
Yes, I'm ready.
You're ready? Okay, cool.
Students ready for today.
Yes.
Okay. Mariko, could I maybe have the first few minutes with you in my WebEx room after this now? I'd like to ask you something, and then you could come in at, I don't know, 10 past or so after. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so thank you for today. I will see you soon tomorrow. Bye bye.
Mariko, I'll see you in a second on the
Yeah.
WebEx.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Bye. Have a nice day, everyone. Bye bye.